Good morning and welcome to everyone to this Housing Solutions Platform webinar. My name is Clotilde Clark-Foulquier. I'm coordinating the Housing Solutions Platform and I'm very happy to welcome you here. So this webinar will be about the topic of reconciliating energy poverty policies and climate change policies, particularly in the context of the renovation wave. I'm very happy to have so many speakers with us today, and I will first leave the floor to Ruth Owen, Kieran Cuff, and Sorka Edwards to introduce this webinar. Just a first house rule regarding the technical side of things. So if you are participants, you cannot ask question in audio, but you have on the right question box and you can ask question in writing. Please do so, and my colleague will be taking your own question and send them to me so I can send them back to the panelists, and we can have a bit of a Q&A session after the speakers' speeches. So thank you very much. Ruth, this is up to you.
Thank you, Clotilde. Thanks to everyone for joining us today, and special thanks to Kieran Cuff, who's the host of this event. My name is Ruth Owen. I'm the Deputy Director at Fianza. Fianza is a European coalition of organisations working to end homelessness. We lead the Housing Solutions Platform in partnership with Housing Europe and Fondation Abbé Pierre. The EU Green Deal promises to make the EU carbon neutral by 2050 and to leave no one behind. Today's debate is about how to deliver in this context on three closely related challenges: access to housing, energy efficiency in housing, and energy poverty. So firstly, too many people in the EU struggle to access and keep decent housing. This has become one of the defining social challenges of our time. 9% of poor households in the EU live in severe housing deprivation. 40% are overburdened by housing costs, and about 700,000 people at least are homeless every night in the EU. This has huge impacts for health and well-being, and according to Eurofound, costs about 194 billion to EU economies each year. The second issue is that way too much housing in Europe is energy efficient. Buildings are energy inefficient. Buildings are responsible for 40% of energy consumption and around 36% of greenhouse gas emissions. 70% of the existing stock is highly inefficient. And the third challenge is too many people face energy poverty, concerns around 50 million households in the EU, and 17.9% of poor households who are unable to keep their home adequately warm. So the big question from Fianza's perspective is whether the Green Deal will be able to address these challenges in an integrated way. That would mean targeted measures to improve the living conditions of the poorest through energy efficient renovation. It would mean actively avoiding the unintended consequence of increased housing costs for those least able to pay. It would mean really going beyond business as usual and actively including hard to reach and vulnerable groups such as poor owners and people living in the private rental sector. The time has come to walk the walk as well as talk the talk about a socially just transition. And I think energy efficient renovation is an excellent place to start because the stakes couldn't be higher. Renovation is a cornerstone of the Green Deal. The renovation wave planned by the Commission presents both risks and opportunities from the point of view of the poorly housed. And the key questions are, will sufficient attention and resources flow to those who are already left behind when it comes to decent housing and access to energy? And will steps be taken to safeguard the right to housing of the most vulnerable? We're very lucky to have some fantastic experts to help us address these questions today. In the first session, we'll hear from two researchers, Professor Urga Vorst-Satz from the Central European University, who will present on synergies and trade-offs between energy poverty alleviation and climate change mitigation. Then Professor Katrin Grossman from the Erfurt University of Applied Sciences will present on the relationship between energy efficiency and residential segregation. And then we'll hear a series of reactions from key EU policymakers. So first, MEP Kieran Cuff, who's the rapporteur of a draft EP report on maximising the energy efficiency potential of the EU building stock. And then 3 speakers from European Commission DG Energy, Paula Ray Garcia from the Buildings and Products Unit, Diana Barglazan from the Policy and Financing Unit, and Teresa Aristegui from the Retail Markets, Consumers and Local Initiatives Unit. Then last but not least, Maureen Cornelis from Next Energy Consumer. We'll then have a short round of Q&A before some concluding remarks by Oran Lamas from the Fondation Abbé Pierre. So thanks very much to all the speakers. We're very much looking forward to an informative and lively debate about this important agenda. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ruth. Karen, I'll just directly leave you the floor.
Thank you so much. And I assume at this stage it's just a brief introduction, and I'll go into a little bit of detail on the own initiative report after the 2 main speakers. Am I correct in that?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
So thank you for hosting the meeting.
No, it's my absolute pleasure to do so. I think this issue is so timely in a period in which we are many of us are confined to our homes. We are realizing the importance of good quality indoor health conditions and good quality buildings for us to inhabit. Really, I think there's a golden opportunity to address the challenge of climate change, the imperative of a just transition, and the important need to address energy poverty. And I think there is a huge possibility with the renovation wave to do so. And I'm really looking forward to the speakers' contributions, and then I can go into a little bit of detail on the own initiative report which I'm preparing.
Great, thank you very much, Karen. So, well, I turn toward our 2 academic researchers. First, Diana Erg-Bossat. So you have worked on the synergies between policies for climate change mitigation and policies for energy poverty alleviation. Your research points out to trade-off and synergies between those 2. Trade-off as when a policy allows advancing on one policy field, but at the expense of the other one. For instance, a carbon tax or environmental policies that could increase further the deprivation of wealth of families. Your research argues that 1 key areas for action could benefit both climate change mitigation and energy poverty alleviation, and this is renovation, energy retrofit. So can you please tell us a bit more about your research and how do you see it fitting into the renovation wave? Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
I will make you presenter.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, of course.
Perfect. Then I'm just waiting for the opportunity.
Sorry, Diana, I'm really sorry. I forgot to something very important. So the Housing Solutions platform is a partnership between FIANSA, the Fondation Abbé Pierre, and Housing Europe. And so I will just first turn towards the director of Housing Europe, Sorka Edwards. You're here. I'm very sorry. Please, Sorka.
Oh, no problem at all, Clotilde. So, no, it's we already had a great intro from Ruth and Kieran there, and I'm really looking forward to hear from Diana, who's such a leading expert for so many years from the Central European University. Now, just a few words from our side, from the housing perspective side. Obviously, it's one of those really tricky issues because we're touching on, to tackle energy poverty, you have to tackle the quality of the housing, the price of the energy, and the income. So it is a complex one for policymakers to solve, because at national level, I mean, this requires joint up action from different ministries, from social ministries, energy ministries, housing ministries. The same applies to city level. You need collaboration between those social, vice mayors responsible for social affairs and those responsible for energy. And often it's not forthcoming. So it's like a tough policy nut to crack. And then we see it also at really local level. You also need collaboration between social workers, between experts on energy and experts on the housing side. And so we are seeing this happening, but it's a tough one. So just 3 points on those issues. So on the quality of the stock, what we see from the housing side, I mean, a big part of this has to be just bringing up the quality, the scale of renovation, bringing down the cost of renovation, and making sure the right financing is in place for that. And for that, we're starting to see transformation of supply chain and roles. And crucially, as Ruth pointed out, this has to mean that we transform those supply chains, but we keep in mind that the rents should not go up in the case of, for instance, the rental sector, and because something like that can really put a brake on the whole transition. Then in terms of people and the energy bills, what we are seeing are more and more initiatives to make people part of the energy transition, produce their own energy and benefit directly from the production of their own energy as their energy bills go down. We see just very close to us in Flanders, the social housing providers are rolling out solar PV for direct energy consumption with a direct reduction of bills for the tenants across Flanders. So this is really happening. So it shouldn't be a passive approach. This should be where people are really taking part and owning the transition in practical terms, so owning the energy. Even in districts with high levels of poverty, we are seeing projects also funded by the Commission. Power Poor, we saw, is just about to start, empowering people in fuel poverty to also participate in the works that can address the fuel poverty, increase their own skills, and so use the transition as an empowerment. Then quickly on the role of EU, we really welcome Kieran Cuff's draft report, which we're sending in amendments. I think you're stressing that this has to be a neighbourhood level intervention. This has to be a program that really turns around neighbourhoods, also disadvantaged neighbours into places where people are proud to live, and we can use the energy transition for that. And what we're proposing from our side is a 100 district renovation wave program as part of the Our Homes Our Deal initiative, really concentrating on districts with vulnerable groups, and bringing in one-stop shops which give neutral information, free information to people across sectors to really make this something that is living and something that is happening, and as Ruth stressed, something that brings everybody along with it. So thanks a lot. I'm really looking forward to the interventions today.
Thank you very much, Sorka. So Diana, now it's up to you. Sorry for this again.
No problem at all. Actually, I think that was really, really important to introduce what I'm going to talk about and strengthen some of my messages. So while I'm waiting for the right to project my screen, I just want to say that we are really truly at a historic opportunity in the era when governments are going to spend between 5 to 28% of their GDP on economic recovery. And this is, we have never had that opportunity before. Yes, my screen show is coming. So that just spending a little part of this can already solve both climate change, actually can basically solve totally climate change if we have that kind of spending also continuing, but it can certainly put us on the right path, as well as I believe we can very strongly improve the situation on energy poverty as well. So let's start from the climate perspective. We know from the special report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where I'm also a vice chair of Working Group 3, that yes, we can do, although it's getting very late, but potentially we still could reach 1.5 degrees. Nevertheless, excuse me, sorry. Nevertheless, there are different ways how we can get there, and I just want to show two particular ways, and these are two of the lines. So if I go back, then And then let's unpack the line P1 and P4. So all of these are different scenarios which get us to 1.5 degrees. Let's unpack this particular one, P1, and let's unpack P4, this line. So when we unpack P4, we look at that, it's mostly about so the gray is fossil fuel related emissions, the yellow is back, so bioenergy combined carbon capture and storage, and the orange is FLO or agriculture, forestry and land use. So we see that this, and then the vast majority of scenarios presently reach 1.5 degrees, or even as a matter of fact 2 degrees, with planetary scale deployment of negative emissions technologies, primarily BECCS, bioenergy combined carbon capture and storage, which raises very strong concerns from the scientific community for many reasons that I don't have time to get into. But also, if you look at this, there is a very significant ethical question at all, that all of our benefits will have to be paid for by our children and grandchildren, who will have to engage in these massive measures to tackle climate change, and they will have to pay for it. So scientists looked at what if can we do scenarios where we don't have to engage in all these very controversial activities and ethically, especially ethically questionable activities. So one scenario is the so-called lead scenario. This is P1, and there you see there is no yellow, so there's no bioenergy combined carbon capture and storage, and there is no overshoot. So this avoids a lot of the questionable measures. But as you see, the big difference between P1 and P4 is the massive change in demand. So the big message is that the only way we can get to 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees without deploying controversial, ethically and environmentally controversial and risky technologies at the planetary scale is if we tackle energy demand massively, if we focus very much on the demand, reduction of energy demand. Fortunately, buildings are the area where we can really do this well. We know by today how to build zero energy buildings, not nearly zero, but truly zero. In fact, we know how to build energy plus buildings. And in fact, they are now market reality in most of the basically all over Europe in most of the building types. And this particular picture is actually from Eastern Hungary, one of the most deprived regions of the European Union. This is actually from the area where lots of workers of the former communist heavy industry live. And these are just very simple homes for families, and these are zero energy. So there is absolutely no subsidies involved in this, and the builder is building this because they are able to sell it like candy, because the residents here for families is extremely important that they have zero energy bill. These are poor families, so if you have a zero bill for utilities, well, in particular energy-related utilities, that's a very significant reduction in their monthly expenditures. Fortunately, it is Hungary also, which has shown already in the 90s that you can do this also through retrofit, because this is the Solanova project. This is also the typical communist industrial block housing that you have all over former Eastern Europe. And they reduced energy consumption also here by 90%. And what it also showed the world, which is really important, is that not only did it reduce energy consumption, but it also significantly improved the quality of the life of the resident. And here in this picture, the resident shows how the outside filter and the indoor filter, so clearly air pollution, the reduction of air pollution is a very significant co-benefit of these buildings. Also noise reduction because of the very good buildings. So through this example, we have started our research, and we have many publications on the topic and lots of reports showing that actually perhaps there is no other climate mitigation technology where you can have such a strong array of co-benefits. These are really not negligible. So particularly health gains, especially important for energy poor people, because very often the children miss school, or the adults are also ill because of the lower temperatures. If you live in a very highly efficient building, it's very unlikely that you will suffer from low temperatures under ideal temperatures, but also they productivity, which means more school time, more ability to work, so also more ability to earn money. So, but the issue, so we know how to also do this in retrofit. This is another example. This happens to be actually from Ireland. It was the first and largest social housing scheme which was awarded the Interplay certification, which means it was retrofitted to an energy to a passive house standard. And there are fortunately many of this around in Europe. Nevertheless, what's really important that today, even a passive house level is not enough anymore. What you see here, you think it's a building, but actually that's a mistake. What you see here is actually a power plant. This is the power plant of the 21st century. And this is the happens to be the building of the Technical University of Vienna, which was refurbished to Energy Plus level. And here I have to admit that this was one of the most important scientific errors of my life, because for a long time I published and I was convinced that zero energy buildings are not possible in certain building types, in certain areas, for example, in cool climates with less sunshine, or office buildings with very high indoor energy plug loads, as well as just very high levels of energy use, and also high-rise buildings where you have fairly little surface to volume ratio. Now, yes, scientifically I wasn't that wrong, because if you see the original energy consumption of these buildings, 800 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, is really very high. Even if you lower it to today's modern Vienna office buildings levels to 450, this is way more than the roughly 60 that you can produce with if you integrate the solar energy into this building. However, fortunately, there are even more crazy people than I am. So what they did is they still said, well, why not try? Let's come from the 480 and let's see what we can do. And don't worry if you can't read all these things in the screen. They're in Germany, but it doesn't matter. The point is that electricity is very complex. And what they did is the following: they optimized over 9,000 components in this building. It was not one rocket, none of them was rocket science. There was no a magic bullet. However, just taking the effort and thinking and looking around and optimizing 9,300 components, and this is the result. The plug loads to the electricity use was reduced by 10-fold. And as a result, if you reduce it by 10-fold, this means you immediately can make a zero energy building, because 61 is bigger than 56. So the message that I'm trying to show is that energy efficiency is crucial also to zero energy buildings, and also crucial to climate neutrality. And by the way, it is also crucial for the energy poor, because for them it's, although this is the commercial building, but similar reductions are also possible in the residential sector. So it is really crucial that that the energy bills are lower, since energy bills take a very substantial part of the expenditures of the energy pool. However, it's crucial that we need innovative financing solutions for this. And fortunately, this panel is also a lot about these financing solutions. The reason is that we need to bridge the major discount rate gap between the public interest and private investors. Because if you look at it purely from the climate perspective, if you compare it with most other climate-related interventions, energy efficiency in buildings is among the most cost-effective. And it pays back most, even without the carbon price. If you look at the alternative that we are having, when we really, not the cherry picking ones, but the later longer term carbon mitigation options, most of them do not pay back. Carbon capture and storage don't. Climate engineering or solar radiation management, and many of these technologies that we would have to deploy at massive scale have no payback at all, unless with a very strong carbon price. This has, even though, yes, it has long payback time. That's exactly the problem, that the private investors and the owners do not have such long investment time horizons. So this payback time gap is that it has to be, which is basically a discount rate gap, because private investors have a very high discount rate. They want their money to be returned sooner, whereas from a public perspective, if we want to tackle climate change, these are really among the best investments. So what the point I'm trying to drive home is that we have to stop thinking about housing retrofits from a perspective that is the owners who always have to pay for it. Yes, if it was simply for their own benefit to save energy, would yes, but this is a public interest, this is the global interest that we tackle climate change, and from that perspective, if these are the best climate solutions, then we have to mobilize massive climate finance to pay for these solutions, and not expect the individual owners or the individual investors to invest, or at least not clearly it will be in the mix. So in this short speak, I'm clearly polarizing a lot of things, but I'm just trying to deliver a couple of messages. So it needs substantial.
Just 5 minutes, please. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you.
So, but the good news is that after the crisis that we are experiencing now, these enormous recovery spendings could be once in a lifetime opportunity to fast forward the deep retrofits on European building stocks. Why? Because we are seeing that we are going to see in the order of 5 to 28% of GDP spending in the next year or so. We know that tackling climate change would require only 2.5% of GDP, although that would have to be sustained every year. But this means just a minuscule amount or share of this enormous spending. If that is for the right purpose, we can fix even the climate crisis and the COVID crisis and the economy as well. And the really good news is that, in fact, in most of the recommendations that I looked at so far, retrofits are identified in most of the post-COVID recovery advice. For example, Sir Nicholas Stern just published several reports and papers on this, and out of the 5 measures, one is certainly on retrofits. Hungary is also considering this very strongly. Many countries are looking at that. But this report that was mentioned is also really excellent. But I do want to make a very, very important before I make my very important point. Yes, it is because retrofits are very employment intensive. This is an earlier report we've done for the European Climate Foundation, while Hungary still had the 2nd highest unemployment levels in Hungary. And we've done, this is probably the most rigorous study on the employment impacts on retrofits, because we have to take into account there are certainly negative impacts as well. You are going to lose jobs as well. But if you look at it, the job losses are so minuscule as compared to all the different types of job gains in many areas of the economy. It's not only in the construction sector, but in many other sectors, if you look at the truly macroeconomic modeling. So definitely retrofits are the ideal public investment to spur jobs and to revive the economy because of the diversity of the jobs that you're creating, and also a lot of these jobs are either outdoor jobs or those which can be done by home office. So these are also very ideal for the COVID period, while we have not yet tackled the virus. So, but the point I really want to drive home very strongly, and this is, I must admit, this was the only point I'm a little bit missing also in the present draft of the report, is to emphasize that it really has to be deep retrofits. I've shown already several ways that today we can do zero energy buildings. And in fact, most of these, and we're just coming out with a paper on this, actually don't cost more than regular retrofits, if you look at from a life cycle perspective. Also, if you're clever, the retrofit from new construction, definitely they don't cost more than regular buildings. So we cannot build or not retrofit anything less than zero energy. Okay, it's a bit polarized, but still let me make that this strong message that every building from now that we build or retrofit to less than zero energy buildings locks us into not only a warmer future, but also locks in the energy poverty of those families living in those buildings. It's not enough to save 20, 30, 40%, 60% when we know we can save 100%. What we want is that we want to eliminate the energy bills of these families in the long run. And if we know that it doesn't cost more on a longer term solution, this is what we have to. Because this is with infrastructure related investments, there is a very strong lock-in risk, and this is what we demonstrated in our paper in Nature Climate Change 2 years ago, and in many other several other papers, because once you touch the building, you will not be able to come back to it, or it will be very uneconomic to do it again. Once you change a window that is not compatible with the passive house level, you have locked out the opportunity for the retrofit. And these are a bit old scenarios. So, but the point is that we could reduce global energy use while giving everyone full energy access and full thermal energy comfort by at least 34, and this is old analysis. By today's technology, it must be at least 60% reduction, and with all the GDP increase by the middle of the century. But even with the best policies that we have today, that will instead increase it by 46%. So we are talking about an 80% lock-in, which is both in climate, locking in emissions. We are locking these buildings into high emissions mode and locking these residents in for high energy expenditures for the remaining decades to come that we really cannot afford. So my point is that that let's focus really on trying to make sure that any building we touch is a zero energy retrofit or new building if at all possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Diana. So you insisted on the importance of energy retrofit, not only as an instrument to address climate change, but also as an instrument of recovery after the COVID crisis. You spoke of the importance as well of the lock-in effect when retrofit is not carried out at its best, and therefore energy poverty cannot be alleviated. But coming back to your point, particularly on the importance of an innovative financial solution so as to address the payback gap, because at the moment retrofits always carry out a cost that will have to be paid by owners or people who rent. This is what Catherine Grossman is looking at and is somehow criticizing, if I'm not mistaken, in the push for energy retrofit, saying that actually there is a huge social cost because this has direct impact of urban segregation, where people, where actually the energy retrofit cost is carried by owners and therefore by tenants, and then we see a real transformation of the city. But Catherine, you will explain that much better than I can. So I give you the floor.
Thank you. I now have to somehow probably share the screen. Okay. Okay. So hello from Leipzig in Germany. Thank you for inviting me to this talk and for adding the perspective of an urban sociologist to the debate on how to make the envisioned renovation wave inclusive and just. I first want to say that I fully agree with the 3 goals raised by Ruth in the beginning. I'm also working on energy poverty in a cost action engager, which is concerned with energy poverty at the European level. But I do this from the perspective of an urban sociologist, and that means I look at housing markets, at neighborhood development mechanisms, and at residential segregation. So we've just heard that retrofitting is a practice that fuels hope to create multiple benefits. I don't have to repeat this really. It has been laid out pretty clear that retrofitting is expected to fight energy poverty, to create jobs, and to reduce carbon emissions. But the premise where this assumption starts from is that in existing housing markets, wait, hang on a minute, I need to do something with my screen. I don't see it fully because the technical thing is in the way. I'm sorry. So the premise.
You can reduce it if you want, if you click on the arrow, or you can move the box.
The arrow. Ah, the arrow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the premise is the poor live in the lowest quality housing stock, and this is because the housing markets, the existing ones, have brought them there. And my question is, if this is the case, why then would we assume that after retrofitting, the low-income households would, in the long run, not end up in low-quality housing again? Why do we assume that the improvements to the buildings stay with the poor? And to explore this question, I would now like to go through this interplay between retrofitting and residential segregation. Residential segregation is the uneven distribution of social groups in urban space, as illustrated in this map of Berlin, where you see the concentrations of welfare-dependent households in the darker colors. Segregation is problematic for a lot of reasons, among others, because the poor tend to cluster in substandard housing, which has the mentioned effect on health and social inclusion. Segregation research over the past 60 years has revealed a set of common drivers leading to this unevenness of the distribution of social groups. The three main areas for these drivers are the unequal housing supply in the first place, that comes with different prices and different quality. The demand for housing where high income groups can afford to have the housing according to their preferences, whereas poorer households cannot have this much choice. And the third one is the welfare state with its regulations, law, and support for low-income households to afford housing that they cannot buy on the market. I will start with the housing supply side. And first, from an investor's perspective, it was absolutely rightly mentioned that investors seek a return on investment. And the literature in urban economics on energy efficiency talks about a price premium in this respect. And these studies, by and large, find that the price premium of energy efficiency exists. So for instance, here a study from Ireland, which found that A-rated properties receive a price premium of 9.3% as related to D-rated properties, while the F and G-rated properties reduces the price by 10.6% relative to D-rated properties. And in this study, you find also this table which summarizes findings from other such studies all over the world and at different points in time. And the findings are always very, very similar. If you look at the right column, it continuously says efficiency improvements increase the sales prices, house prices increase along the efficiency scale, certified buildings as green receive a sales premium, etc., etc. And the sum of this is, of course, private housing market actors seek a return on investment, and they find it. Capital investment into energy efficiency pays off, with some exceptions. This has to be mentioned, of course. But if you look at a resident's perspective, and I think this is why you invited me to this talk, to give also some of the more extreme examples of hardships. This is an example that has been documented in national public media in Germany, in Hanover, where this pensioner here received an announcement of an energy retrofitting, and together with this announcement came the announcement of the rent increase of 1,200 euro per month on top of the already existing 700 euro basic rent. This is a rent increase that this person with his pension surely could not afford, and this is an extreme case. Extreme cases illustrate the mechanisms. Of course, they are not representative of all cases, but to take you to the hotspots of such practice, this is Berlin, Pankow, one of the districts that experiences accelerated gentrification. The house that you see was sold to a new private investor, and this new private investor announced retrofitting and modernization. And the person in the middle of the picture is the last tenant in the house who did not give up to stay there. And the hardship is like this. He got the announcement of the retrofitting together with the announced rent increase. In blue, you see the existing rent as it was before the retrofits, which sums up to about 1,000 euro. Then the cost increase only for energy retrofitting measures per month for the flat of 120, I think it was square meters, is already 1,400 something euro. Plus some other increases would triple his rent up to 3,000 euro. That makes an increase of 280%. Now you might ask, is this even legal? Yes, it is, or let's say it was. The German building law allowed landlords to add 11% of investment costs for modernization to the rents annually. Simple example, if a multifamily house has 10 flats and the landlord invests 100,000 euro, this would mean that he could increase the monthly rent of each apartment by 91 euro monthly. And if he invests a lot more, he can increase the rents a lot more. And the main thing here is that the return of investment after 10 years exceeds the investment costs, and the landlord is allowed to keep it. This law has been challenged and it has been changed. It is now possible to only add 6 to 8%, but the mechanism is still in place. This policy type aims at mobilizing private investment. It stems from the 70s and was originally intended to attract private investment into inner city locations in the 70s. But the thing is that investors usually don't behave like rabbits, and they choose where to make use of such a policy. So in the tight housing markets, we see that this policy makes existing rent gaps even more attractive in the prime locations, while in the peripheries, in the shrinking regions, in the small cities, in urban places, nothing happens in terms of renovation. Let's leave Germany, let's go to Poland. I think I've seen one of the authors of this study in the list of participants today. This study looked at a district in Gdansk in Poland, a former working class district, where with EU funds and a Polish urban renewal program that included low carbon objectives, the whole neighborhood got a remake. So parts were demolished and new builds, and others were refurbished. And the authors found that after the measures, half of the residents who lived there before returned, but the other half disappeared, partly due to indirect displacement because, for instance, housing wasn't affordable anymore, or even through direct displacement because of debts. This much for the policy side. Let's look at housing demand. Is energy efficiency a driver also in housing demand? There are a couple of studies on this issue. I'll show you some results of my own study in this village, not a village, it's a small city. Classical German small city with a historical, well-refurbished core, even some new energy efficient housing in the center. Then you have the unrefurbished suburbs or new builds. You have houses from the 60s, you have houses from the 70s. In this city, we conducted a representative survey and we've asked people about their housing preferences. And we found that for the pull factors for a previous relocation, that is the criteria that made you choose the house where you are now, the energy-related criteria in red here were already among the top 6 criteria. But if we ask them about the future, about envisioned relocations that they plan, these factors moved up to the top of the list, and now being the 3 most important factors to have a modern cost-saving heating system, low heating costs, and a good thermal insulation. And interestingly, this preference is prevalent as well among households that live above poverty line, so with a decent income, and households below poverty line. But of course, the ones with a decent income have a much bigger choice on the local housing market than the ones who live below poverty line. And what happened in Delitzsch is segregation is increasing over the years. So I can't prove a direct link, of course, but in the Northwest, this picture shows you that the Northwest has experienced a decline in households above poverty line and an influx of households below poverty line. So a concentration of poverty is emerging here, while the center, for instance, experienced the opposite, more of affluent households and less poor households. And if I could not prove the link with this study, but a study from Gothenburg in Sweden can clearly show this link. This is a modeling of how housing costs, housing rents would develop after retrofitting. And they had an interest, especially in the public housing stock of the millennium homes. What you see in the map is in the gray and dark color, the average income of existing residents. And the little lines that mark the buildings come in different colors, indicating how much the rent would increase after retrofitting. And the pattern that emerges is the darker the color of the district, that is, the lower the average income, the higher the rent increase. You can see it if you look to the left corner, up or down, where the dark districts are, and you see the yellow, the orange, and the red to indicate a high rent increase expected. And you can see it even more pronounced if you look at the north of the city, with a lot of dark districts, low income districts, where the house increase would exceed even the maximum of 45%. So
excuse me, just 4 minutes maximum, if that's okay, Catherine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. Energy efficiency is a potential driver of residential segregation. It affects housing supply, demand, and the welfare state regulations do play an ambivalent role here. On the supply side, it increases the housing prices. The affordable housing stock may decrease, but I do admit we do need retrofitting, of course. But it fuels also speculative investment in private stock with attempts of renovation, which is not okay. On the demand side, it becomes a more important factor in housing preferences, and here the crucial thing are the restrictions in access to a retrofitted and high efficiency housing for the low-income households, so indirect as well as direct displacement. And in terms of welfare state regulations, we need to watch the climate mitigation policies, how they interact with housing policies, which could produce disadvantages for households. And we really need to see that funds for retrofitting cannot be used in private or state-led gentrification attempts. Aren't there any good practices? We've just seen already some from Hungary, and there are, of course, but they have one thing in common. They have agency of stakeholders. So for instance, this is a neighborhood in the second largest city of the Czech Republic, Nový Liskovec. And the district mayor here turned the whole place into a low energy neighborhood. And at the same time took care of the minorities living there, the Roma minorities, to not make them leave the district. And another good example in the city where I live, where this housing estate was refurbished, and it also received significant funding, national model project funding, which made it possible. And here the housing increase, the housing cost increase could be reduced to 10 euro for a flat for a month. And an inhabitant said in an interview, this is not a problem. But one of the process-wise best practices really described in the literature, this is an example from Munich, colleagues have conducted this study. And this one was done by a cooperative, non-profit, with a very inclusive process, having the residents take part in all the decisions. But what I did not have is public funds. And in this project, the left red corner indicates households which, after the retrofitting, pay more than they paid before the retrofitting, because the housing costs did increase and the energy costs could not decrease as much. This is households, majority low-income households, who could not profit, while the yellow corner is more the higher income households who could profit from the measure. So, conclusion: energy interventions are a potential driver for residential segregation. We cannot overlook that. Good practices require agency of owners, companies, stakeholders, and they require public funds. And even then, we do not know about the long-term effects. The technological solutions, they affect buildings, but it's the housing markets which moderate who can profit from the better technology. So the role of urban space and segregation dynamics needs more attention to avoid that the energy efficiency becomes just a new frontier of gentrification and segregation, and only then can a renovation wave be just and inclusive. And to again say that I do agree with all the three goals. I want to draw your attention also to a call for action that we released from the Cost Action Engager just yesterday, a call for action on a right to energy, where we, among others, also say that housing quality is one of the most pressing issues, and we urgently need to accelerate thermal retrofitting, but while we keep housing costs affordable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So we don't really have time for questions right now, but I just would like to remind participants that you can ask questions in writing on the right, either to the researchers, to Kieran Cuff, or to representatives from the European Commission. So if you want to ask a question, please do so. Just write it and tell us to whom it is addressed and who you are, and we will have a short Q&A session at the end. We might overrun by 10 minutes, but I think it will be okay. So very big thank you to Diana and Catherine for underlying the importance of energy retrofit in addressing energy poverty, but also the risk that energy efficiency is a potential driver for residential segregation. So I turn toward our next panelist now, and particularly first Kieran Cuff. Thank you for being here. You are a former Irish Minister of State and now a Green Party member of the European Parliament. You are author of a report currently under discussion in the Parliament on maximizing the energy efficiency potential of the European building stock. Well, Kieran, what do you think of the concern raised by Catherine and of the point made by Diana? How do you think the renovation wave can address those? And can you please tell us a bit more about your report?
Yeah, maybe I'd start by giving a little bit of detail about the report, and then I'll turn to the questions. Firstly, can I thank Diana and Catherine for their presentations, which I found really informative. I'm speaking to you from Dublin, Ireland, and I live in a 200-year-old house that we've brought up to a decent energy rating that reduces our bills substantially. But even within my neighborhood, I see public housing that was built 60, 70 years ago that has been brought up recently to passive house standard, a fantastic pilot project. And I think these kind of initiatives that I see in the neighborhood around me can be utilized in any neighborhood in Europe. It's not easy, and I know this as an architect. These technologies are not easy, but they're not rocket science either. So I think we need to improve capacity, and I think we can take almost any building type in Europe and bring it up to a net zero energy. And in doing that, I think we can bring the three sides of the triangle of tackling climate change, bringing about a just transition, and tackling energy poverty. We can deliver on those three fronts. There's too many people living in cold, damp, older buildings with high heating bills, too many people in poverty. And I think we have to tackle these first. And I think, Diana, as you mentioned, Stern's report from Oxford Smith School that came out yesterday asked the question, will the COVID recovery package accelerate or retard progress on climate change? That's up to us. It's up to the Parliament, to the Commission and to the Council to make progress on that. So the own initiative report commissioned by the Energy Committee, one of the 20 committees of the European Parliament, it's a very tight format. I think we only had 900 words. It will increase with the amendments, but we tried to put as much as we could in. And we tried to tackle 5 different areas: neighbourhoods and communities, finance, construction technologies and building materials, standards and skills, and digitalization. Let me just maybe put a sentence to you on each of those issues. Neighbourhoods and communities, we're stressing the need for integrated renovation programs. What do I mean by integrated? Well, bringing communities together for one thing, so that they feel involved, empowered, and listened to in how the renovation wave happens. There's also the possibility of looking at different typologies and finding a common approach to them in the neighbourhood, and common systems as well. District heating obviously works well at a neighbourhood level. And then communications. We can set up one-stop shops so that people can see visibly the face of renovation within their area. I think that also allows us to tackle the gentrification, or renoviction, as some people are calling it, the propensity of improvements to lead to higher rents and the eviction of some people. And that does have to be tackled at the heart of any policies that we put place. And it may require much stronger legislation to protect vulnerable building inhabitants. Secondly, on the finance issue, the money is big, but as Diana points out, 2.5% a year. It's not that big, but it could require 75 billion of European funding every year, or perhaps 300 billion overall. And we need that for the next 30 years. So it's almost a quadrillion of money in total. So that is a huge figure. But if we divide it down to bite-sized chunks, I think it is feasible and it is possible. There can be a gap in terms of payback, and I think we need to address that as we go forward. I'll talk about that again under finance. Just to move on to construction technologies and building materials, we're seeing some fantastic new products that are integrating insulation, photovoltaics, and other add-ons. There's great technologies out there, and we have to remember that a building is renovated perhaps only once in 30 years or in a generation. So yes, we do have to go for the deep renovation rather than small little bits over time. We also have to take into account the life cycle, so ensuring that we're not using lots of embodied energy in the products that we use. In terms of standards and skills, I think we need a European skills initiative to upskill people, particularly in areas that have sunset or declining industries. And that's where the just transition comes in. We can give new skills, and they can be very high level professional skills, or they can be strong craftsmanship skills, and ensure that people receive training and the abilities to do this very detailed retrofitting. We have to be aware of the gender gap as well, and ensure women are at the heart of the upskilling that we provide. We need minimum energy standards in countries. Some countries have them, but they don't all. And we also need building passports, so that we can see at a glance what has been done and what needs to be done within particular buildings. There's also finally a focus on digitalization. Why? Well, if we can distribute energy generation and storage, we've much greater capacity to tackle greenhouse gas emissions. We have to be careful of data protection, but there is possibilities for neighborhoods working together to provide and consume their own energy. So citizens can become prosumers, generating energy and feeding it to their neighbors or into the grid. So that, in a sense, is the summary of the report. The different political groupings are now amending the report, and we hope to bring the report to plenary before the summer and get it finally approved and feed into the Commission's work in the summer. To get to the question, the synergies between social policy and climate policy, I think we need to tackle low income, poor quality buildings first. I think we need to target public housing because typically those living in poverty, many are in public housing, and it's quite easy to quantify and address at a neighborhood level. So if we roll out the renovation wave, starting with the public housing that is of poor quality, but simultaneously, I think we need to legislate to ensure that we don't have prohibitive rent increases, and that has to go hand in hand with all of that. I didn't mention finance, which is another one of the points in the report. It is crucial that we use all the instruments that are available to us. The European Investment Bank has said they want to become a climate bank, so they're willing to do this work. We need to increase the technical capacity so that building owners can get good advice on how to do this, because without good advice, the cost of renovations can be quite high. So to conclude, we need to tackle the low income, poor quality housing first, and we do need legislative initiatives to integrate social improvements with the energy improvements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. So I note two main points. Your call on maybe stronger legislation to protect vulnerable groups, maybe with something on rent increase, and also your point on financing to address the pay gap, as was earlier mentioned by Diana. So now I turn to, we have actually three representatives from the European Commission with us now, but unfortunately the European Commission system, IT system, does not enable them to have a video, but they should be with us on the phone. Paula, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great, great. Well, so Paula Garcia, thank you very much for joining us today. You are the Deputy Director of the Energy Efficiency Unit in the European Commission. So you have heard our presenter, you have heard Kieran, and you know his report. So could you tell us a bit more about the renovation wave and how do you see it taking into account those risks in terms of social impact of a renovation wave, and how do you see it addressing this pay gap? And we will then hear also from your two colleagues, Diana Barglazen from the financing team, and also Teresa, more from the consumer perspective. So I'll let you to speak to us now, Paula. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks again for inviting the Commission and DG Energy in particular to take part in this event. And good morning to everybody. It's really a pleasure to be part of this talk. And unfortunately, for technical reasons, we indeed only have audio connection. So thank you also to the researchers for their presentations, and of course to Mr. Kaff for summarizing the work that the Parliament is doing and that he's leading on the report on energy efficiency in buildings that will certainly feed in a very timely way in the preparation by the Commission of the Renovation Wave initiative. So, as you mentioned, I am Deputy Head of Unit C4, which is a unit working on energy efficiency in buildings and in products, and is the one leading the Commission work on the preparation of the Renovation Wave initiative. But this comprehensive initiative. So I'm here also together with, as you said, Diana Barglazen from the sister unit on energy efficiency and financing, and with Teresa Aristegui from the Consumers and Retail Unit, which is also leading the work of DG Energy on energy poverty issues. So moving now into substance, as you know, the Renovation Wave initiative is a very central element of the European Green Deal and also very important in the context of recovery. And this is now being supported quite widely, not only by the Parliament, but also by member states. This is definitely very welcome and very useful for the preparatory work that we are doing. So the aim is to scale up building renovation, but to do so in an integrated manner, so that we look at all the aspects, being energy, climate aspects, but also social issues, financial issues, and sustainability issues. So coming back to some of the points that were mentioned earlier by other speakers, we see the renovation wave contributing not only to delivering, of course, on climate and energy objectives, which are very important, but definitely to alleviate energy poverty and to create both better living conditions, healthier buildings and neighborhoods, but also local jobs and more generally a healthier environment. So moving now into the issues that were highlighted before and that are also put as questions for the Commission, I would like to underline 3 points. The first point is really the strong link between EU citizens and households' economic conditions on the one hand, and the quality of energy performance of housing on the other. And this point was also highlighted by previous speakers. So I think we all agree that the quality and the energy performance of buildings have a major impact on affordability of housing, and that therefore also low energy efficiency is one of the main causes of energy poverty. It's not the only one, but it's a very important cause. And in this regard, it's also more likely that low-income people or people also with disabilities are the ones in old or in non-refurbished buildings or rent houses or apartments with low quality and low energy performance. So in this case, they also face spending difficulties and a higher share of their income going into heating costs. So this is quite an important issue, and it's also why energy efficiency measures, in particular those focusing on building retrofits and deep retrofits, are really one of the means to address high energy expenditure in households. So this is the first point, the strong link between economic conditions on the one hand and household conditions and then energy performance of housing. The second point is to indeed underline that the current climate challenges require a transition that is both green and just. And I think on this, there is definitely agreement in the Commission on the points that were also made by Mr. Kaff and by other speakers, because the renovation of buildings needs to be part of a just transition that combines renovation and energy efficiency, but also social policies, and that is particularly attentive to managing employment and social challenges. So here, just to mention briefly that, of course, it's very important all the links to the European Pillar of Social Rights, and our colleagues in DG Employment are closely associated for this reason also to the preparation of the Renovation Wave initiative. Then to underline that in the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, energy poverties are already quite central, and on this my colleague Teresa Aristegui will refer to, as well as to the ongoing work on guidance on energy poverty or the Energy Poverty Observatory. But also to underline that there are concrete already legal provisions, being in national long-term building renovation strategies or in the energy efficiency directives, that already look into how to connect energy efficiency policies and social policies and how to address energy poverty more effectively. And then a final point for this second block of issues that I wanted to mention is that this green and just transition means only finance mobilization, and being particularly attentive to the residential sector and to vulnerable people. So here it's important to foster investments, being in the recovery discussions or in the upcoming MFF negotiations, so that, for instance, through InvestEU, there is a focus on badly performing buildings and on social and vulnerable housing, including a grant component as necessary. And here my colleague Diana Barglasan is best placed to elaborate on this. So I move to my final and third point, which is to zoom in into the possible risks that were mentioned for the renovation wave and the interplay between retrofitting and residential segregation. So on this, it's indeed an area that requires close attention because, for instance, national housing markets and rental prices are primarily influenced by local issues. And this includes, for instance, location, high density, and then also having the price of land as the most impactful factor. So then at the same time, we know that a renovated building, but this doesn't go only for energy renovation, but renovation in general, is likely to come with a higher price, as it was also shown by research. Here, what we think is important, and we are also well aware of the links between higher energy performance and increased asset value for buildings and for housing. So what is important is to underline that the effect of renovations, which do not include energy efficiency aspects, is similar on prices increases, whilst they do not have the advantages of energy renovation. So this balance and this factor is important to keep it in mind, because on the other hand, building energy renovations should reduce energy poverty and should cut on energy bills. So we need to somehow approach this in a combined manner that looks not only at the energy aspects, but also the social aspects, and that favors, of course, renovations that tackle energy aspects and that improve energy efficiency, so that these benefits also come back to those renting the buildings. But then, of course, there is the risk that was mentioned, that in the end, because of an overall gentrification problem, then vulnerable people will need to move away from those buildings. So on this, really, we need a concerted approach, and we need to raise awareness at all levels, local level, national level, public authorities, to see how to be aware of this and to tackle it appropriately. And there are some aspects also and some avenues to be explored, mentioned by Mr. Gaff, which is the integrated approach from an energy and social perspective, for instance, at the district level. That's one area to be explored further. We also need to really twin in energy efficiency and social aspects, which is to some extent already, as I mentioned, part of the clean energy package. And it's also why we work very closely with DG Employment in the preparation of the renovation wave. So I think these are the main elements. It's important also to mention that energy poverty and some of the problems that were mentioned, for instance, as regards the link to segregation, could also be alleviated by addressing other issues, such as the split incentives between landlords and tenants, and to really make sure that there is a focus in particular on tackling worse quality building first and public housing through renovation waves, and also to look into how to, from a legislative perspective, at all levels, national, local, and European, we need to keep tackling energy and social improvements. So these were the three big issues that I want to highlight, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paula, for your input and for the Commission. It's good to see the Commission taking a position and underlying their vision for the renovation wave to also be social and be aware of the social consequences. We also have from the Commission with us Diana Barglasan, who's team leader of the financing team in the energy efficiency unit. So Diana, I'd like to go back to you to speak about financing, because as Karen pointed out, there are two main tools to make sure this renovation wave will be a social one. It's first legislation, but also financing. So how do you see the renovation wave to address this social risk, and are you aware of those? Does it already include some sort of financing scheme to avoid for the retrofitting cost to be transferred to housing price of lower income groups? Are you with us, Diana?
Yes, hello. Good morning also from my side, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss this topic. I think it was already mentioned by several speakers, and very rightly so, that what we need to do is really have a coherent approach where we look not only at climate, energy efficiency or clean energy objectives, but also social objectives. And we need to make sure that the clean energy transition indeed leaves nobody behind, and everyone can benefit of that. Well, there are these aspects indeed, that energy efficiency is correlated with a higher value of the assets, a higher value of the house, which on one hand is positive because it's likely to motivate investors and building owners to make the necessary decisions and investments in energy efficiency, because they will also have some advantages. But as speaker earlier just very rightly put it, so there are some speculative investments and people who will try to just increase their benefits to the detriment and harm of others. And there is a need for really a very well coordinated reply to that. And as Paula mentioned earlier, there is a need to raise awareness to this risk, to the potential risk of segregation. What we try to do is to promote these innovative financing solutions that were mentioned as needed, and we also see that they are really needed. And it is not only about energy efficiency, it's also about social objectives. And what happens with people affected by energy poverty and very low income people is that there are not so many solutions currently put in place by member states to help them implement energy efficiency and increase the quality and the energy performance of their homes, of their dwellings. However, there are very many support schemes, and often the way energy poverty is tackled, what we see from a financial point of view is that there are compensations given to people to be able to cover their costs, or they benefit sometimes of regulated prices, energy prices, which are lower, or they get funds to just cover their energy, in particular their heating costs. And this is a solution that provides immediate relief. However, if we look in a very long-term perspective, if we look over 20, 30 years, this type of support just goes to cover energy costs without really bringing more benefits. So if these funds would be channeled to provide support for energy efficiency improvement, or to some schemes to support renovation of the dwellings and the houses where these people live, the effects would be much better, because overall the cost might be the same. And I agree that the payback time can be very, very long if we go for very ambitious energy renovation and to nearly zero energy buildings or zero energy objectives. But also, if you provide just temporary relief every year, the problem is not going away, and the need for this support remains if year after year for a very long time. While if there are money given for investments in energy efficiency, the people could mention of all the benefits that were already mentioned, of better health, better comfort, less pollution, and this would be a better option. What we see happening is that we have seen some very successful initiatives. Some of them are not particularly targeted to people affected by energy efficiency. I would say probably almost none of them is targeted specifically to that. There are a few schemes and initiatives targeting social housing, so that we have. And there are other schemes or projects, initiatives that we see, like one-stop shops, that aim to cover all the people in an area, including people with a very low income. And maybe to give some examples from projects, successful projects that we have financed through Horizon 2020 and through ELENA, which is a project development facility. We see, for example, in one-stop shops in France, they managed to implement energy renovations, bringing the cost, the energy cost down by at least 40% for the people in the area. And they have put in place a system of third-party financing that is managed either directly by the regional authorities or in partnership with the financial institution. So basically, they provide financing and they recover it through reimbursements. But they managed to get reimbursements at a level of, I think, even less than 50 euros per month, which compensates to a very large extent the costs of the investments through energy savings. Often what we see is, indeed, there is a gap. It's for deep renovations, for ambitious renovations, it's not easy to have the investment fully covered through energy savings, although sometimes this is quite possible. And then if there is a gap, there are other ways to cover it, and grants are one option. And taking into account all the subsidies and all the support systems that exist really helps to see what really needs to be covered through energy savings. One financing solution that works very well is based on energy performance contracts. So basically, we'll have an energy service company that would be willing to make the works and provide a guarantee that there will be energy savings to a certain amount. And that guaranteed energy savings can be used for reimbursement. If they are guaranteed, it's also easier to involve financial institutions into that, and they feel safer and they are often willing to provide better conditions. Now, there are different studies that show all kinds of effects, and I was a bit surprised to see, I must confess, to what extent the rent can increase in some cases, and to what extent it can be pushed by some owners to cover very quickly their investments in energy efficiency. At the same time, there are also investments showing that in the long run, it's perfectly feasible in many cases to cover the investments made through energy savings. And in particular, if the objective is not to look only at the investment cost, but take into account what is called housing costs. So when people put together in a study the investment costs, but also the difference in energy costs, quite often when this difference in energy cost is taken into account, the payback time for the energy investment is reduced. And it's not only energy savings, it's also lower costs with maintenance, with repairs, because renovated buildings usually requires less repairs and lower maintenance costs. Other solutions that
excuse me, maybe just 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah, that's very fine, and that was also my intention. Just to mention what we also see emerging on the market are solutions that involve authorities, for example, through building property. There is a system called PACE in US and in other parts of the world. It was brought to Europe by a project financed through Horizon 2020, Eurobase. And the idea is to have the local authorities, eventually in partnership with financial institutions, providing funds for the upfront investment costs for energy efficiency and recovering these costs gradually over a very long period of time through an increase on the property tax. And this type of systems, energy performance contracts, or this PACE-like mechanism or other forms where you have funding provided upfront, even if it's not fully grant, even if it's a rent and it has to be reimbursed, have the advantage that even if the costs are passed in the rent, they are passed over a very long period of time and not upfront, not trying to recover all these investments in 1 or 2 or 3 years. But I mean, with financing, we can go to some extent, and there are things we can achieve, and definitely it's a very important dimension. But there are other areas as well, and it's very important indeed to also have regulations in place and try to avoid abuses and make sure that people can really benefit of the advantages that that the renovation can bring.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Diana. I'm afraid we are running late. I would like to still give the floor to Teresa, who's working for DG Energy as well as the European Commission, but more from the consumer perspective. And then Marine Cornelis will provide us with some recommendation. And I will ask you only two questions that have come up from participants, and then Oran will conclude. So I hope we can finish at 12:15 instead of 12. So Teresa, are you online? Can you hear me?
Hello, you can hear me properly?
Yes.
I'm just connecting my... Good morning.
Good morning. So you have the point made by Catherine and Diana and Kiaran and the reaction from your two colleagues from the European Commission. What would you add from your perspective, which is more consumer orientated, on the potential for the renovation wave to address energy poverty?
So first of all, thank you very much for including me in this great webinar. Thank you very much, Diana and Catherine, for the very insightful papers and all the interventions until now. So indeed, I'm a policy officer at the DG Energy unit overseeing retail market, consumers and local initiatives. And I think just to pick up on the comments from my colleagues, I think we really cannot underestimate the importance of the implications that we're going to be seeing in future from the clean energy package. So I personally am dealing with all the preparatory work for the energy poverty guidance. And I think it is worth reminding everybody that with this new clean energy package, member states are required to identify the households most in need of protection. Such an identification of households most in need of protection helps targeting public interventions and the delivery of concrete consumer outcomes, and increase in energy efficiency, of course, and basically allow for more control of public expenditure and a decrease in internal energy market distortions. The guidance is really, on energy poverty, is really a part of a major initiative on consumers and citizens. So we are very much basing ourselves on the empowerment objective of the Green Deal, and it really underpins the directives from the clean energy package. As regards concretely the renovation wave links that we are going to be making with the energy poverty guidance, there is no doubt that energy poverty is intrinsically linked to the sector, and we don't doubt that the initiative takes this fully into account. I think it is fair to say that we are trying to focus the recommendations that will be coming out as effectively as possible to all socioeconomic and geographical realities across member states. And more recently, I think we have very much sensed the urgent need to focus on cities networks, for example, to hear what experiences they have that we can draw on to include them in our guidance. I think I would also like to make the link to the existence of these new models of renewable energy communities as actually one of the best solutions to enable integrated renovation programs that were actually mentioned just now, and to really focus on neighborhoods and communities. It will, for example, these models would allow for more one-stop shops to help on renovation works in these areas. And then I would also like to draw upon the European Parliament funding that we have received to launch a project for the provision of technical assistance to a number of municipalities, which will very much be marking the next months or foreseeably next year It really represents a boost of both the Energy Poverty Observatory and Covenant of Mayors work that we have seen until now that has been very helpful. And of course, related to the webinar's topic, we hope that the assistance will be focusing to a large extent on renovation advice. So I think from my side, if it's okay, we can move on to Marine.
Thank you. That's very much okay. Thank you very much, Teresa. That's very useful. So Marine, you are a consultant. You're the executive director of the Next Energy Consumer, and your work focus on putting citizens right at the center of the energy transition, looking at the challenges of energy poverty and making sustainable development inclusive and fair. I'm really sorry, time is short, but I've asked you maybe to come up with some recommendation on how could this renovation wave be socially fair. Have you planned to take up some of the points that we've just heard, such as one-stop shops, energy performance contract, technical assistance to local authority and the role of local authorities? Can you tell us a bit more? Thank you. If you could do it in 10 minutes, it would be amazing.
Okay, I will. I wanted to share my screen, but
yes.
If it's not possible, it's really fine.
No,
I mean, so thank you so much. Thank you so much for the very interesting presentations. So I hope I am in like view.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, present. Well, yeah. Okay, no, it's not the way I wanted you to see it, but that's all right. Okay, let's do it this way. So, yeah, I think it was a very, very, very relevant and interesting presentations. Everything was really interesting, but the thing is, I missed one particular word in this whole discussion, is this idea of building trust and having people really on board. I've worked with many different projects and many different initiatives, also at the local level, and all the time, what people would tell me, what the organizations would tell me, is that it's really hard to find and to reach the families that are actually in a very deep state of poverty or are actually suffering from energy poverty. Why? It's because for them, every day is a hardship. Every day is something complicated. Every day there is a new complication. They are not only housing poor or energy poor, they are accumulating different kind of poverties and vulnerability. Their kids might have problems at school, for instance. They might have trouble finding a job, or all these issues are very linked. So if somebody just ask them to go to one-stop shop, it doesn't really work this way. What works is for local organizations such as Caritas or this kind of underground and really bottom-up organization to just observe the situation and see that there is something to do with them, that maybe the problem that they are expressing, I don't know, maybe they say that they always need clothes because they can't have proper clothes because there is mold on their clothes, for instance. Maybe it's linked to something related to energy poverty, and that in this case there is a possibility to find another local relay to help them prepare a file and apply for subsidies, and in this case get out of energy poverty with proper support to their specific case. In particular, I have in mind this very, very inspiring initiative in the north of France called Réseau Ecohabitat, and they are working with Caritas volunteers. And this picture I took with my colleagues Naomi Kratzfeld and Marilyn Smith. It was taken in one of the person's home. You can see that it's something you wouldn't live here, but the person who was living in this house had been living there for more than 30 years. It was it was unbelievable for him to receive free money from the government. So there was all this trust process that needed to be created. So I think that's the first recommendation I would like to make, is really go for people needs, go for signposting the households, go for customized project to overcome bureaucracy, to overcome all kind of mental blocks that may be true or not. Everybody must feel that they have a chance, but if you want them to believe it, you don't have to say there is a communication on that. You have to go and help them. So the second point is really about the information and the empowerment of all stakeholders. I mean, it's so relevant that the social sectors, such as for instance social workers or NGOs, are also aware of all the issues related to energy poverty. That it's not only about not being able to afford your bills. You can also raise awareness among firefighters. It's done close to Barcelona, among postmen. I mean, they are the people who well, maybe less now, but until recently, they were the one mailing, asking you every day maybe how you were. So they are this kind of very local relay that can really help building trust and be there. But I mean, those stakeholders can also and should also be real estate agents, doctors, family doctors, and also social housing providers. So there is a number of stakeholders that can be on board.
Marine, we can't see your presentation. Maybe if you shrink it, we will be able to see again your slide. Yeah, great, thanks.
This way?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, sorry for that. So so about this, what the European Commission also mentioned how important it is to unlock innovative financing. But innovative financing means also mobilizing the private sector. And for instance, banks, and in this case, it's important to get special guarantees for vulnerable households. Those special guarantees can be brought thanks to a work with the third sector, with NGOs. Another thing I've had in my mind for quite a while, and I'm really happy that I can share that with you today, is I think that insurance companies have a critical role to play. Because when there is a damage in a home, when there is a fire or something, even a small fire, this kind of repair that will come should also lead automatically to retrofit, or could be the trigger point to get to the improvement of living conditions. So maybe there are some things to play with, some innovative actions to play with. About strategic capacity building, well, there is something that we all have to keep in mind, is that applying for funding, applying for EU funding, applying for support is extremely complicated. It's a special skill. And no matter how competent your building manager can be, or the social worker, your trusted social worker can be, they might not have the skills and the time and the confidence to apply for a European project. And neither do sometimes local administration. So there is this kind of bottom-up listening that we have to do. We have to work with local partners in order to build this chain really of trust. We also mentioned sustainability. Sustainability is also now or never. I'm not only talking about net zero and about carbon objective. I'm also thinking about circular economy. I'm thinking about sustainable development goals. Because when we look at housing, when we look at the comfort of the person, when we look at their needs, we can see that they are also linked to food, to water, to transport, to education, to women and minority rights. This person, the photo of in this person's house, this person didn't have access to hot water, and I mean, it sounds unbelievable in 2020 in a Western European country, but it was the case. And so all those issues are completely linked. And the MEP, Charan Chupra, said something very interesting about digitalization. The thing is, digitalization should not be at the detriment of the earth and of getting raw materials from the poorest part of the world. I mean, we have also to think, when thinking about sustainability, that we have to go also for sufficiency, and that we need to recycle as much as possible, and sometimes you don't need digitalization in order to have a smart home. You need something very practical and concrete. Very, very good common sense. Sometimes we just have to listen to what our grandparents were doing. So my last point is, of course, on the political and legal tools and leverage that we need. We need them to boost trust, not only with fiscal policies that can be, of course, that are necessary at many levels. But also for member states. For instance, there could be energy efficiency clauses in rents, something that Catherine mentioned, or there could be also some sanctions for homeowners if they don't comply with renovation obligations. This is an idea that has been circulating in France for quite a while. Member states also need to strictly enforce consumer laws to protect everyone, in particular the most vulnerable, against scams. You can't imagine how many issues, how many complaints there are regarding weird commercial practices or scams, or people who accumulate debt because of some renovation that were never performed, because they trusted somebody who was not actually reliable. And this is undermining trust so much, and it's also undermining the potential of renovation and renovating. So at the EU level, I think that the renovation wave is really a great idea, and I think that MEP2 initiative is also extremely needed and necessary. But we need to go for the most ambitious programs, and they need to be updated very, very often. Technology will advance, techniques will advance, and we can be bold, and we can be bolder. I'm so glad that in the recovery fund, there is against COVID, there are some mentions of green options and things like that. But we have to really push for it in this direction and make them accessible. So something that I would definitely would not like to see, but I would also like to see it, is for the EU to start infringement procedures when the just transition is not implemented on the ground. And that is, I mean, the EU, Europe in general, has to show that they have teeth and they have ambitions, and that the EU and Europe is here for the people. And this is, I mean, trust is not only with one partner, it's really a chain. So I hope that this all together will really lead to a just transition and a just renovation wave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marine, and I apologize for cutting you a bit short. Thank you for making it a quick summary. That's a very interesting element that indeed we didn't look at. How can legislation and the work on the renovation wave be an instrument of trust building to really give ownership of the transition to the people in situation of energy poverty. So thank you. We are late, but here is what I propose. I will read you and show you the questions that have came in. I will ask Catherine and Diana to take 1 minute to respond to the question. And then I'll ask Orhan to conclude, and maybe Kiaran, if you want to have the last word after Orhan. And before all of this, I just would like to let you know that the Housing Solutions Platform is organizing another webinar at the end of May. The date is to be confirmed, but we will let you know when the date is confirmed. And it will be on the Just Transition Fund. Is the Just Transition Fund enough? A housing perspective on leaving no one behind. So if you're interested to connect for our next webinar, do let me know or watch out this space. So now the question, can you see my screen? Yes, okay. So I will show you the question we have. We have some question on the depth of renovation and how is it's a bit what you spoke about, Diana, on the you call it the lock-in effect and how the depth of renovation can have a positive or negative impact on a household. Then a question on the investment, basically waiting to invest in zero energy building can lead to technical lock-in, but only investing in zero energy building with the current technical solution may lead to no investment or not enough investment. How can we deal with this? Maybe for you, Diana. For Diana from the European Commission, question on financing. Will there be alternative solution developed to finance renovation in the case of vulnerable household or region municipalities that are not attractive enough? I'm afraid we don't really have time maybe for the two last questions, but so I will give the floor to Diana, Catherine and Diana from the European Commission really in 1 minute if you want to. I know you can't answer in 1 minute, but if you want to react to those questions in 1 minute. Thank you. Diana, please.
Yes, excellent question. Thank you very much. I believe it is not a technical lock-in. Lock-in is really if you cannot change, you make a decision and an investment that you cannot undo for decades to come, and which will lock your actions and emissions and expenditures in. I don't think we are talking about that. And also I think that this difference between zero energy building, net zero, and nearly zero will disappear soon, but we definitely need much more demonstration of net zero retrofits. Once they become good practice and we have much more experience, both financing and technological and implementation and construction, then this cost margin will disappear, but we just need more action on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, for your short response and for your response. Catherine, is there one question you would like to react to?
I'm certainly not the one to talk about the depths of renovation, but concerning negative impacts on households, I think the one decisive thing is the interest of the owner. So I strongly advise to look at who gets the money and to privilege the non-profit homeowners, which is owner-occupiers, cooperatives, any social enterprises that will provide housing without an interest in making profit. And if you give out funds to those who want to make profits, you need to install control. We've heard a lot of ideas on that in the previous discussion. And I'm grateful for Anna Bayomi to raise the question of the peripheral regions where investment usually doesn't go to. I think we also need a geographical sensitivity in how we support and who gets what kind of funds. And I think the shrinking, less attractive, deprived regions need specific and even less conditional funding than others.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So we're getting to the end. I'm really sorry about the delay and that we are going to finish so late. Orhan, so from the Fondation Abbé Pierre, thank you very much for being with us and concluding. So the Fondation Abbé Pierre is one of the Housing Solutions Platform partners. And on Monday, actually, Manuel Domergue, research director at the Fondation Abbé Pierre, together with 65 French personalities, signed a tribune calling on an end to energy poverty and particularly for support to local authorities so that they could finance up to 100% of energy retrofits so as to carry the cost burden we spoke about earlier on. So as a conclusion to this meeting, Orhan, can you tell us a bit more about the FAB engagement, the Fondation Abbé Pierre engagement on energy poverty and the perspective on the need for a renovation wave in 2 or 3 minutes. Sorry about that. Thank you, Orhan.
Yes, I'll try to make it as short as possible. Thank you, Clotilde, and thanks to all the participants who made this Housing Solutions Platform debate so interesting today. Fondation Abbé Pierre, as you said, is a French organization working in the struggle against poor housing and homelessness. And we were created in the 90s. And a part of our activities is directed to energy poverty as a characteristic of substandard housing. Our implication in this field is made through financial support of renovation projects directed to most vulnerable households, and through advocacy as well. We are involved in some national initiatives that bring together actors of the climate change issues and actors of the social sector in order to make proposals that would be green and socially just. I will say, to conclude quickly, I would say that for a renovation wave that would not contribute to social exclusion, the actions taken may take into consideration the most vulnerable households and who are those who are mainly the most affected by energy poverty. So there are some important criteria that needs to be taken into account, and I join Marine a lot on her presentation. To sum up, we have to be aware that vulnerable households will need support to quit their energy poverty situation. So renovation wave can also be implemented through creating ambitious projects of support to people, to support them before, to detect the most vulnerable households, but also during and after the works, and to involve them in the renovation project. Also, in many public aid policies related to energy efficiency of housings, households always have to pay a part of the renovation, and it is necessary to assume that some households won't be able to afford this. So the programs must also make possible that they don't have to pay for the remaining part that is not taken but by the renovation project. Renovation wave must also take into account there is a diversity of occupancy status. Social sector, housing stock needs to be renovated, but tenants of the private sector are also very affected from energy poverty. So programs must be directed to them. They must not be forgotten. So those modest owners, occupiers. There is also a need of being ambitious, as you said also, Marine. It is necessary that the renovation programs must be conditional on achieving the highest energy efficiency standards, and local authorities have a crucial role to play. They must be able to evaluate and to follow the evolution of the renovations, to plan and to pilot them. As I said, we are part of a partnership in France of some initiatives, and we are calling for a massive plan to eradicate in 10 years the most inefficient housing stock in France, which represents nearly 7 million housing units. And I think, well, it is highly pertinent as a European scale as well. It implies huge investment, but as it has been said today as well, there are huge benefits in many areas. It can renovation wave must create employment. It will beneficial for public health, and I think it's quite important in the context today. It would improve the power purchase of the population, and energy consumption could obviously be reduced. So those gas emission and pollution. So to conclude, yes, renovation wave is clearly needed. It is needed and it is possible now. The EU has a role to play to impulse for the policies and to impulse investments, but there are really essential conditions that need to be respected in order to prevent social risks and to include the most vulnerable. the poorest in those renovation projects. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Oran. Thank you. Kieran, I'll give you the floor to close the meeting. Thank you to all panelists. Thank you to Sorka, to Ruth, Catherine, Diana, Marine, and Kieran, of course. And thank you to the 3 representatives from the European Commission that we can't see, but thank you very much for making the time to be here with us today and for your interest in this topic. Kieran.
So thank you all for being part of this, and thanks to our colleagues in the European Commission for being part of this as well. I stress the need for an integrated neighbourhood approach, but I think we also need to have an integrated approach at a European level using regional funds and other funds that are available. In conclusion, I think the crisis may challenge us in making available the funding that is needed, but in fact, I strongly believe it reinforces the need for action, and I hope that there will be political support across the spectrum to make this happen. The need is urgent, the need is important, and if we do this right, we can dramatically improve the quality of people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kieran. Goodbye to you all, and thanks again for joining us. Bye.